Today we're going to be learning Yevamot Daf Nun Daled. This is the Daf for Shabbat. We're going to start at the bottom of Nun Gimel Amud Bet. What we learned in yesterday's Daf at the beginning of the 6th chapter is Habal Yivimto, Ben B'Shogei, Ben B'Mezi, Ben B'Ones, Ben B'Ratzon, right? There's all sorts of possibilities that Yibum can be effective, okay? Whether it was intentional, unintentional, unwitting, forced. Okay, we're going to now get into some more details about what exactly is forced. So we started at the bottom of yesterday's daf. What is forced? If you want to say the Gentiles forced him to have relations with her, but there is no such thing as having relations accidentally, right? Or someone forcing you. It's just not possible. I shouldn't have said accidentally, right? We mean just being forced by someone. So therefore, ela biyashen, maybe it means that you were sleeping. And then, okay, theoretically, maybe it's possible. V'hama Rav Yehuda, no, that doesn't work either, because Rav Yehuda says, yashen lo kana b'yevimto, doesn't work. Why does he say this? We're not exactly clear, although the Gemara will give a reason later. Rashi says it's the yashen lav bar da'atu. V'lo havi kinyan o kinyan. Rashi says when you're sleeping, you're not conscious of what you're doing. So it was done without any sort of the Rambam actually says it's because you're not bardat. You're not able to be thinking when you're sleeping. It's almost like you're a different person. You're a person who has no dot because you're asleep. So what we're going to see later is, and the other commentaries really say it's more that you need kavanah, you need intent. Okay, now maybe Rashi thinks that you need intent and he's just saying, well, you don't have dot and therefore you can't have intent. In any case, we'll see that inside, that you need to have intent to commit an act of intercourse. Not that you need to have intent to do it with your Yevamot, but you need at least basic intent. Okay, that will become clear in the Gemara as we go on. And when you're sleeping, you can't have that. So again, it's going to be hard to find a case where you're forced and yet you have intent. So we'll have to kind of find something in between. Ela binitka, let's say you fall down, okay, accidentally onto this woman. Okay, you're kind of in the process of a fall. You fall on the woman the man falls on a woman who's supposed to do Yibum with. And that also doesn't work because maybe that's forced, right? Forced by, being thrown upon her. Rabba said, and here's a case where we're going to see it. This is a famous sugya in Baba Kama, which comes up in the sugya where there's, again, a similar thing about Adam u'ad la'olam. People are always responsible for their actions, whether they're awake, whether they're asleep, whether it was intentional, whether it was unintentional, same idea. Whether it was forced, you're also responsible. Also there's all discussion. But you're not always responsible if it was forced. So just like here. So Rabba says, nafal min agad v'nitzka. If you fall, here it's talking about damages. You fall off a roof and you smash into a person. Okay, you fall on a person. Chayav ba'arba'a dvarim. You're chayav for, normally when you fall on a person and you injure them, any kind of injury you do to a person, you're obligated for 5 things. Nezek, damages. Tsa'ar, pain you cause them. Shevet, the amount of money they lose, like unemployment insurance for not having a job, all the days of work they miss, ripoy, the doctor's bills, and boshet. Boshet is the 5th, that's embarrassment. We're going to see later why you're not chayav in boshet, but you are obligated in all the other things. And that's based on Adam u'ad la'olam, you're always responsible. So even if you fall on someone by accident, you fall off a roof, if you damage someone, you're responsible. However, it says, b'yevimto lo kana, but if you fell on top of the Yevamot and engaged in intercourse with her. Again, very hard to imagine. This is not a real case. Okay, I can't imagine this ever happened in the history of the world. But if you were to fall on a woman and have relations with her on your way down, basically you fall on top of her. And then Yivimto lo kana, that wouldn't work because you had no intent whatsoever. Ela kigon shenitkaven leishto. Here we're now going to say, okay, here's a creative case. Again, very odd that this would actually ever happen. But again, we're trying to figure out what could the Mishnah possibly mean when it said be'ones. Well, let's say a man intended to have relations with his wife. Utikafto yivimto uba'aleha, and the Yevamot pushes her way in and goes and has intercourse with him as he was about to engage in intercourse with his wife. So there the intent was for intercourse with his wife. He ended up with the intercourse with the Yevamot. That kind of works, except that if you remember, we quoted this Tani Rabbi Chia, who said, even if both are anusim, now you can't have a case of both being anusim in this case, 2 of them being forced, because it wouldn't happen here. Because here she forced her way in. He was the one who was forced into it. She was not. So therefore, So what's going to be the case according to him? Now they kind of combine the first answer with the last answer. They said, Gentiles came, okay, he was about to have relations with his wife. Gentiles came and pushed the Yevamah to have intercourse with him. So the intent was to have intercourse with his wife, but he ended up having intercourse with the Yevamah, but in a manner that was forced. And with that way, we could have Shnei Haman of Sin, because she wasn't trying to either. She was forced by these Gentiles. Okay, now that was our resolution. Again, very creative interpretation, very unlikely situation to this issue of what is onus. Where do we get it from in general? That, by the way, I just want to point out, these cases seem very unrealistic, but it's very likely that the Mishnah was using terminology, and this is why I told you the same terminology is used by a person who damages. And it could be they just borrowed the language and they didn't really think that there was going to be a case of ones by Yibum, but maybe they just kind of said it because this is a term that comes up in a whole bunch of cases, bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezi, bein b'ones, bein b'ratzon, but not necessarily that that you really needed to say ones, because it's very unlikely it would actually ever happen. Where do we get this from? Okay, now where do we get this from that all these cases, Yibum is going to work? Ditanu Rabbanit, we're going to quote a Braita. Yevamah yavo aleha. It says, right, the Yevamah has relations with her. Mitzvah, from here we learn that Yibum is ideal. So Yevamah yavo aleha, that's the ideal way to do it, as opposed to Chalitza. Davar acher, we've seen this before, by the way. Davar acher, Yevamah yavo aleha, bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezi, bein b'ones, bein b'ratzon. Yevamah yavo aleha, anyway he comes upon her, right? So whether it was intentional or not, whether he was forced into it or not. So now they say, wait a minute, you can't have two drashot from one pasuk. That's always a rule. Ha afikte lemitzvah. But didn't we already teach that it comes to teach you lemitzvah? So how could it also teach you bein ba'ones, bein b'ratzon? Lemitzvah. So now they changed the drasha. They said, well, really, the fact that Yivum is more ideal than chalitza, you don't really learn from there. You really learn it from mi'im lo yachpot ish. If he doesn't want to do Yibum, then he does chalitza. That's what the Torah tells you. From there, it's very clear that Yibum is ideal. So then they say, right, hachafetz yaben. If he really did want to, then he would do the mitzvah the proper way, which would be Yibum. And therefore, when the pasuk comes, it's really coming to teach you the second halacha. Tanya Ida. Now we're going to have another drasha, and then we're going to ask the same question. If we're going to use Yevamah yavo for this drasha, how do we use it for bein ba'ones, bein b'ratzon? So first, let's see the drashot. We're going to darshan not only that, but some other words in the verse. Yevamah yavo aleha kedarka. That means he engages in normal sexual relations with her. Ulekacha shelo kedarka, right? This is anal intercourse. Even then, he will fulfill the mitzvah of Yibum, because after that it says ulekacha, as if there's another manner in which he can do this. V'yibem, what does that teach you? What consummates the Yibum relationship? The intercourse, but not the other manners that normally work for Kiddushin, like money or a document. That wouldn't work for Yibum. V'yibma ba'al korcha, we learned. And then it says an additional Yibma, that means he mizimeyabem her. That means he can do it even against her will. Again, we learned this before, that the rabbis then instituted ma'amar so that this wouldn't happen. But by basic Torah law, it would work. So now we're quoting from the original Braita and saying, what about this line? Etc. Right? So how do v'hafikte lekidarka? But didn't we just learn kidarka from those words? So you can't learn two things. So they say, well, really kidarka we learn from somewhere else. The whole purpose of Yibum marriage is to make a name for the brother. How do you do that? By having a child. How do you do that? By having normal intercourse. So therefore, bimkom shemekim shem, right? Only in a way, in the place where you could actually end up having a child that way. And therefore, the pasuk again is free to say bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezi, bein ba'ones, bein b'ratzon. Okay, so that was our taking this drasha. Where do we learn this halacha from? And then showing, well, it seems like we learn other things. And every time we say, actually, you can learn that from somewhere else. Gufa. Now we're going to go in depth into the statement of Rav Yehuda in the beginning of the daf. Amar Rav Yehuda, yashen lo kana b'yivim tov. Why is that? Why, if you're sleeping, does it not work? Damar kra yevamah yavo aleha. Again, maybe theoretically you could have intercourse while you're asleep, but you're not intending for having intercourse, right? If someone were to come upon the man while he's sleeping and somehow get him to engage in intercourse, it wouldn't be that he had any intent for it because he's sleeping. So that wouldn't work because, again, you have to have kavanah at least for bi'ah, right? For relations, even if not for with this particular woman. But you do have to have some basic intent. V'hatanya, but doesn't it say in a braita, bein er, bein yashen, whether he's awake, whether he's sleeping? So that would seem to indicate it's okay. So how could Rabbi Yehuda go against this braita? So they change the wording of the braita and they say, ema bein era, bein yashena. Maybe it's in the feminine form, whether she's sleeping, right, or she's awake. And then we could say, right, Era is awake. It should be whether she's awake or whether she's sleeping. And then it has nothing to do with him. She could be sleeping, but he has to be awake. But then they say, but that doesn't work because there's another braita where it's clear it's talking about him. The Hatanya ben er hu, ben yashen hu, whether he's awake or he's asleep. Ben era he, ben yashena he, or whether she's awake or she's asleep. From there, you can't claim, oh, it really means the woman. It's talking about the man and the woman. So how do you explain that? Oh, it's when you're half asleep, you're dozing. Okay, what is mitnam name? Hechidami mitnam name. How do you define that? You're not exactly awake, you're not exactly asleep. They call you, you answer, but you don't really know how to answer something, some logic, where you have to really think about it. But if they remind you about something, you could remember it, but you're not going to be able to do any kind of advanced thinking. That's what we call dozing. Gufa. Another thing we're going to go back to is the strange statement of Rava about the man who falls off the roof. Amar Rava, nafal min hagag v'nitkach hayav ba'arba'at dvarim u'v'yivimto lo kana. So again, you're obligated in 4 out of the 5 things of damages, and if it happened to be your Yevamot, it wouldn't work. B'nezek, b'tzar, b'shevet, b'ripoy, aval boshet lo mechayev. So again, you're obligated in the first 4, but not embarrassment. Okay, why not embarrassment? Damar en chayav ala boshet ad sheitkaven. You're only liable for embarrassment if you had intent. Amarav. Here, a little bit strange sugya. Amarav and nitkaven, if it wasn't strange enough falling off roofs. Okay, it's a bit of one of those dapim, not exactly the most comfortable dapim to discuss. Nitkaven lahatiach bekotel v'yitiach b'yivimto. Okay, intended to put his private parts into a wall, and instead his Yevamot turned up and he ended up going inside his Yevamot. Lo kana, this wouldn't work, okay, because again, what's missing here? Intent for sexual activity. It wasn't what he was intending. Okay, again, I said it's a little bit strange. If he intended to enter into an animal, and in the end it didn't turn out to be his Yevamot, but let's say she shows up and places herself in place there, kana. It would work. Why? Okay, apparently having interest in having a sexual encounter with an animal is still called a sexual encounter, whereas a wall, it wouldn't be. So therefore, right, if it's with something live, then that would count if in the end, it turns out you end up with the Yevamot instead of what you were intending. Okay, the next sugya for a while is going to deal with this, which is the Mishnah had said, even if you just do the beginning of the sexual encounter, intercourse, where you go inside, but that's as far as you got, or you go partially inside. Exactly how to define this is a bit of a question. But in any case, it's a partial act. You can fulfill Yibum in that way. So Amar Ula, minayin laha'ara'a min Torah. How do we know this from the Torah? We're now going to bring 4, really like 3 attempts. We're then going to try to play with some of the 3, like a combination of them. And then we're going to bring a 4th, which is going to connect back to the first. So that's a bit of a structure. Maybe it sounds a little confusing, but I'm hoping that will help you to what we're doing. So we want to find sources. So the first source they bring, Shenema, Isha sheyishkavet isha dava v'gilat ervata et mekora he'era. A person who sleeps with a woman dava, that means while she is in nida, she's menstruating. And he reveals her erva, and et mekora he'era, he reveals her with a source of, I guess, where the blood is coming. So now it says the word he'era. So that sounds like he only went inside partially, right? Not fully. So mikan laha'ara min Torah, this is where we get it from. Now we're going to assume then, so here we have it in a case of nida. We'll assume this is true for all sorts of cases of all the arayot, and then likewise it would be also to fulfill the mitzvah of yibum. Eshkechan nida, shar arayot minayin. So they say, okay, well that's true for nida. What about everywhere else? Maybe you can learn from nida, but no, because nida has something unique about it that maybe we'd say, therefore it only works in nida. But everything else that's more lenient, maybe you would need a more serious act of sexual engagement. What's unique about nida? Well, if a man sleeps with his wife when she's in nida, or sleeps with any woman who's in nida, he becomes tameh for 7 days. So there you have it. There's some unique chumrah, and that means we can't learn from nida to everything else. So let's try our second attempt. Okay, the wife of your brother is forbidden to you. Now, it's a bit of a strange thing. If you marry your brother's wife, she is nida. Now, what does that mean? Your brother's wife is always in nida. Nida is a temporary thing. It's a woman when she's menstruating. So they say, Ela kin nida. The pasuk tells you she's like a nida. Ma nida bahara. Now we learn, this is telling you your brother's wife, she's just like a nida to you, meaning you're going to be liable even if you did just hara. Well, that's not good either, because there's a unique thing about this that isn't true. Now, it's not unique only to Eshetach, but it's unique to some of the arayot, but not to all of them. Your brother's wife, can be adol rabot. Your brother can actually create many more wives, meaning he can marry many more people that will be forbidden to you, mishum Eshetach, which really, in other words, means it's something that comes through marriage. It's not that you're born and this person's forbidden to you. This is something that you can constantly add more on. If he wants to, he can marry 1,000 women. Okay, you might say it's not the best idea, right? And we talked about you should have more than 4 wives, but theoretically you can marry, get divorced the next day, marry, get divorced the next day, and spend the next few years just doing that and amassing 1,000 wives that are going to be forbidden to his brother. This is obviously a total exaggeration. Nobody would ever conceive of such a thing. But the point is that theoretically he could keep adding on more people. That makes this different, right? So anything that's through marriage, like kalato, his daughter-in-law, the chamoto, the father-in-law, the mother-in-law, all those people are through marriage, as opposed to bito, achoto, right? His daughter, his sister, all those, you're born into it. You can't add extra ones. Okay. Certainly not, maybe your father can add more children and then you'd have more siblings, but we're talking about the person who's forbidden to this, right? Like your brother. Okay, so now they say, Ela, so that's not a good example because that has something unique to it, that it's through marriage. And maybe because of that, it's got its own unique laws. Maybe we'll learn it from your father's sister and your mother's sister. Dichtiv. Here we have he'era again. Okay, when it talks about your aunt, your mother's sister and your father's sister. So now, okay, again, let's just review. We started with nida, which had the language of he'era. Then we moved to eshet ach, when we said, right, nida has its own unique chumrah because it gets the person impure who sleeps with you. Then we said, let's learn from eshet ach, and then we said, no, because that's right, because there it says nida. And why does it say nida? It must be to compare to nida, maybe for this law of hara'ah. No, we can't learn from there to other cases because that is unique because it's by marriage and not all the arayot are like that. Then we said, so let's try from your aunt. Your aunt, meaning we're going to talk about 2 aunts through it today. One is your aunt through marriage, and one is your aunt that you were born into, right? Your father's brother, your father's sister, your mother's sister. So now they say, and there it has again the language he'era, just like in nida. To which the Gemara says, no, that also ikalimifrach, for the exact opposite reason of esharach, which is malachot av achot em shekain isur haba me'elav. This is something that you're born into. It's not something that you can create by marriage. So now, well, the obvious would be, let's put those 2 together. And these are the ones, from here you can learn the ones through marriage. From here you can learn the ones not through marriage, right? And that would be the obvious. And that's what the Gemara is going to suggest right now. Right? Why don't we learn it from 2? Right? We can learn, put them both together. Which 2? Tete me'eshet ach, your brother's wife, and achot av, achot em, and your father and your mother's sisters. Okay, so now they say, and then we can learn through marriage and not through marriage, and that would be perfect. But what's the problem? Not all arayot are because of connections to, right? This is through your father, through your mother's mother, sister, your father's sister, your brother's wife. These are all close relatives of yours. And not all arayot come through your relatives. So now they say, Elatiti mi nida ve'achot av ve'achot em. Let's try nida, achot av, and achot em. Okay, nida and the aunt. Why? Right? Because then you could get ones that come through marriage and ones that aren't through marriage. Nida is not through marriage. Nida is any woman who's in nida. So then they say, Mala hanach, sorry, achot av is the ones you're born into. So they say, Mala hanach sheken yisur b'me'ela. But what's the problem? These are all things you're born into, or nida just happens to you, as opposed to the eshet ach, which you could create more isurim, right? If the brother kept marrying more women, you'd have more women there. So through marriage. Elatiti mi nida ve'eshet ach. To my parach. Well, you could use nida and eshet ach, and that would be fine, because nida comes on its own. Eshet ach comes from your brother marrying people. So then we'd have marriage issue, the non-marriage, and all would be fine. Right? Because there is nothing to question there. Well, he comes with a question. Ma nida ve'eshet ach shekain ein lehem heter b'chayei osran. You can't ever, so long as the person who forbids them is alive, you can't marry these people, like your brother's wife, okay? Or nida, we're going to have to see exactly what nida is, but the point is, we'll see exactly what they mean. It's not clear right now. So, tomar be'eshet ish, but this you can't learn for all the cases, because eshet ish, for example, that's a good example, by the way, of someone who's not forbidden because she's your relative, right? She's just married to someone else. So she's forbidden, sheken yesh la heter b'chayei osra. But you can't learn that from here, because she actually could be permitted to you if the person who's forbidding her, which is her husband, divorces her, let's say, or dies, then she'd be permitted. Well, it wouldn't be dying, because here we're talking about in their lifetime. They could divorce her, and then she'd be permitted to you. So that is a light aspect of eshet ish, and maybe it wouldn't have this chumrah of ha'ara being forbidden. If you can even remember what the question was. The question was, from where do we learn the ha'ara is forbidden? Again, we went through nida, so you can't learn from there. We went through eshet ach, you can't learn from there. We went through aunt and uncle, right? That your aunt from your mother and your father's side, can't learn from there. So, right, because one is through marriage, one wasn't through marriage, you were born into it. In the end, they try to come up with combinations of all of them. So now they're saying why you can't learn from nida and eshet ach. And then Amarle Rav Acha midifti le Ravina. What are you talking about? Atu nida ve'eshet ach b'chayei osran hu de'en lahem heter. What do you mean? When the person who forbids them is alive, it's not permitted, but it would imply, but it sounds like when they're dead, there is a heter for them. You can marry them. But nida has nothing to do with the person dying or not. It all has to do with days. If you finish your days of nida, you're finished with it, right? Obviously, you have to go to the mikvah, but the point is when the bleeding is over and the days that you need to have, right, minimum 7 days in the Torah are finished, you're done. It has nothing to do with you're being permitted in the lifetime of your husband, right? When he dies, you'll be permitted. And when he's alive, you wouldn't be permitted. It has nothing to do with that. And eshet ach, bibanim tal yerachman. Right, we're now on Amud Bet, the first line. Your brother's wife, it's not dependent on, it's true. It is when he dies, you'll be permitted, but only it has to do with if he doesn't have sons. You wouldn't say it has to do with if he's alive or not alive, because if he's alive, if he dies, you're still not allowed to unless he dies without sons. So it doesn't make sense, this phrase they used. So therefore they edit the phrase and they say, Ela parachachi. This is really the question, what they meant to say. Ma lenida ve'eshet ach shekain ein osran mitiran. Ein osra mitira. In tomar be'eshet ish she'osra mitira. They're just trying to say something unique about eshet ish. Eshet ish, the one who forbids, is the one who can permit. Because again, if he divorces her, then she'll be permitted to you. But in the other cases, he has nothing to do with it. Again, it has to do with the days, or it has to do with whether he has sons or not. So that's what they meant to say. In any case, we can't do any combo. It doesn't seem to work. So therefore, answer number 4, which you could either call 4 or 5, because again, 1 was nida, 2 was eshet ach, your brother's wife, 3 was your aunt, 4 was a combination of a bunch of those 3, okay? And then this next answer is Amar Rabbi Yonah v'itema Rav Huna b'rid Rav Yoshua Amal Ka. It's really because of this verse. We're going to go back to nida and say we are going to learn from nida to all the other cases. What about the fact that nida has a chumrah? Well, there's a pasuk that teaches you that we can learn it from nida. How so? It's a very general verse at the end of, right? It's nice. We're in Parshiot of Acharemot and Kedoshim. Right? There's the Arayot are mentioned in Perek Yud Chet, which we read in Israel last week, and we're reading abroad this week. Acharemot, which has a list of all the Arayot, and at the end of that section it says, Ki kol asher ya'aseh mikol ha'toivot ha'ela v'nichratu ha'nefashot ha'osot. Okay, anyone who does from all these things, they will get karet. Hukshu kol arayot kulam lenida. From here we learn that all the arayot are like nida, because nida had karet. In the pasuk it said, and therefore they learn ma nida b'hara'a av kol b'hara'a. So whatever's true for nida will be true for all of these. So nida was b'hara'a, this one also. So now we have to go backwards. We now have an answer. We're going to learn it from nida, and from there to everything else because of this general summary pasuk. But now they're going to say, wait a minute though. What about answer two? The answer two we brought, which was Esherach. And there it said she's nida, even though she's not nida. So we have to resolve that question. And we have to go back to question three, answer three, where we talked about the ant and say, well, what is ha'ara doing in that pasuk if it's not to teach you ha'ra'a? Because we already learned that from nida to all the other cases. So those are going to be our next two questions. What do we do with this nida that's mentioned by Esherach? So they say, we use this for something Rav Huna says. Rav Huna said, where do we get a remez, a hint, an allusion to a Yevamah, that you're allowed to marry the Yevamah, right? Normally you're not allowed to marry your brother's wife, but for Yibum you are. Where do we see an allusion to this in the Torah? To which the Gemara says, Minayin, what are you talking about? Haktiv Yevamah yavo aleha. It says he has relations with his Yevamah. It's very clear. You don't need an allusion. It says it explicitly. What they're asking for is, how do we know that a Yevamah is forbidden during her husband's life? Meaning that you can only marry your brother's wife, the brother can only marry his wife in the event that the brother's dead without children. How do you know he can't do it during the lifetime? So they say, Hai Sparai. Okay, this is just obvious, right? It's logical. Right? Because it says when he's alive, obviously you learn that, right? Because it says when he dies without children, you're allowed to. From there, you can infer that you can't if the person's still alive. I just want to check one quick thing. Sorry, 1 second. Make sure that this question is really saying that we want to think how, because really the Torah says you're forbidden to marry him. So I want to just see. Right. The question is really right. Obviously, when he's married, you can't. The question here, what they were suggesting is maybe if your brother divorces his wife, then you'd be allowed to marry the person who your brother was married to before, right? While he's still alive, but once he divorced her. Okay, so now they say, right? And then when it says your brother's wife in the Torah, that would just mean when she's the wife of your brother, but she's no longer the wife of your brother, maybe it would be allowed. That was the Gemara's suggestion. And then they say, right? So again, because it says only after, it'll be obvious that you can't marry her before. So they say, no, maybe after he dies, then it's a mitzvah, that's Yibum. But it could be optional before that. You can't really learn from Yibum that it's forbidden before. The second question, so they say, after, you might have thought after the husband dies, yes, but before, no, but that would only be learned out from a lav haba, from an aseh. It wouldn't be a negative commandment. It would just be, because it would be a negative commandment that you could derive from a positive commandment, which actually has the status only of a mitzvah aseh. You're not doing the proper mitzvah aseh. What are you doing? In other words, marry her only if the husband died without children, meaning that from there you can infer that it must be not a possibility when your brother divorces her. But then it wouldn't be a negative commandment. So those are some issues about it. So now they want to know, so really, where do we learn that it's forbidden? Because you could have learned it, it wouldn't have been clear otherwise. So they say, Amar Krab, the Isha she'yikach esh dachiv nidahi. That's where the word nidahi comes in. V'chi esh dachiv nidahi, is she a nida? Of course not. So what does it mean? Ela kinida. מה נידה אף על פי שיש לה היתר לאחר מכן בשעת איסורה בכרת, אף אשת אח נמי, אף על פי שיש לה היתר לאחר מכן בחיי בעלה בכרת. We're now going to learn from this nida. What's true about nida? It's true you can eventually get out of nida, right? Hopefully not eventually, but sooner. But while you're in it, it's karet. Same thing here. You can marry your brother's wife after he died without children. But before that, while your brother's still alive, it's going to be karet, and that they learn from this nida word. Okay, so that we resolve the first question. Second question. Ella. What do we do with this ha'ara word in this achot av and achot em? So they say, as Ravina asked Rava, if you have a homosexual sexual encounter with, right, male with male, how do you know? And you did just ha'ara, okay, would that be enough? Would that be enough to make you liable? Well, that's not even a question. Obviously, it's the case. You don't even need to ask, where do we get this from? Or what is it? Because it says, don't do it in the way you would sleep with a woman. If ha'ara is forbidden for a woman, then it's going to be forbidden for a homosexual encounter as well. So then they say, the question must have been, what if you do it with an animal? This we're going to learn from that pasuk about the ant. Okay, even though it seems kind of strange. Well, this is going to be what we call an imeno inyam. We've seen this many times. If it's not necessary in this verse, because we learned it all from Nida and the summary pasuk there, which teaches it's true for all of them, you don't need it there. If you don't need it there, it must be teaching about something else. What else could be teaching about? Relationship with an animal. So that's what we use it for. Amarli. You don't need the word hara there. Because you can learn from the hekesh, the Rabbi Yonah said from the end of that section, it made all the cases parallel to each other. Then Tanei Winyan Lahara de Behema, then learn from here to an animal. Michti Behema Chayave Mito Beitin. So since Behema is Chayave Mito Beitin, they say, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense then. My time Aktiv Lahara Dida Gabe Chayave Kritud. If you wanted to use this verse to teach about animals, well then you should have picked something that was similar to it. If you sleep with an animal, have a sexual encounter with an animal, that's Chayav Mita Beitin. You get killed by the court. Whereas the ant is Chayav Karet. So why wouldn't you learn it why wouldn't they have put it in a verse that's Karet? That's Mita Beitin. You might say, why doesn't Imeno and Yam work ever? Because why do you put it here? You should have put it in the direct, you should have done it directly. But the point is, if for whatever reason they did it indirectly, it should have been done indirectly with something that was similar to it. So then they say, right, so it should have said it next to Mita Beitim, Vanela from Mita Beitim, Mita Beitim. So they say that doesn't bother us because Imeno Inyan, and not only is it an Imeno Inyan, like that works to kind of learn to all sorts of other things, but also I did a Kule Kra Lidrasha Ate Kti Benami Haimil to Lidrasha. That whole pasuk was brought just for drasha purposes, and therefore, once we're darshaning things about it, we can darshan anything. Kind of, we have poetic license to do all sorts of things with it. So basically, before we get to what that's talking about, let's just understand. That verse, hara, that's mentioned by the ant, is teaching you about ha'ara'a, right? When you do the beginning of intercourse, but not actually complete the act, you will be liable also when it comes to an animal. That's what it's coming to teach you as an imeno inyan. Why are they saying this pasuk is coming for a drasha? What does that mean? So that's the next question of the Gemara. My drasha, what drasha is it coming to teach you? So they say, Ditanya, as it says in a bright, Ervat achot avicha lo tigale. Hey, the erva of your aunt, right? The achot, the sister of your father, lo tigale. Okay, this is a pasuk in Yudchet, in Parshat Achremot. Bein mina'av, bein mina'im. Okay, so they say, even though it says achot avicha, we don't know, is it only a sister through the father, or is it also his sister through his mother? Meaning they share the same mother, or they share the same father. Either one would be included. Comes the Gemara now and says, Vidinu. It's actually, I'm sorry, I skipped a line. First, they're going to question this, really? How do you know? Maybe it's only from the father and not from the mother. Meaning again, if you're a man, your father's sister, whether she's your sister, she's your father's sister because they share the same mother, or whether they share the same father. Now they're asking, maybe it's only if they share the same father and not also if they share the same mother. So the drasha goes like this. Atal male, right? So do we say beim mina'av, beim mina'em, or eino ela? Maybe it's also only mina'av, velo mina'em. Vidinu, it's logical to say. What's logical? Now we're going to quote logic of one way, and then we're going to quote logic of the other way. One could say, chayev kam b'chayev ba'achoto, right? Aunt is not so far from your sister because it's your sister or your father's sister. So ma'achoto beim mina'av, beim mina'em, because it says that explicitly in the pasuk. Okay, it says, ervat achot imecha. No, that's achot imecha. It says ervat achotcha. No, it's not here. Sorry, it's not here. But it says in the pasuk, your sister, right? Either from your father or from your mother. So since your sister, it's clear, it's your sister who shares the same father or same mother, then we should learn also to your father's sister, whether they share the same mother or the same father. So af kan beim mina'av u'beim mina'em. Oh, or maybe kalech l'derech zo. Here, now I can see it says, I see it, it's in Rashi. I thought it was in the Torah but now I see it in Rashi. The sister pasuk, dichtiv bat avicha o bat imecha. It's your sister who's the daughter of your father or your mother. So now they say, or maybe you learn it, oh, kalech l'derech zo. Maybe we should go a different track. Chayev kam b'chayev b'dodato. We obligated you, and we obligated, right here, your father's sister, and we obligated your aunt. Who's your aunt? Your father's brother's wife, okay, the wife of your uncle. Ma dodato mina'av v'lo mina'em. There, it's only your father's brother who shares the same father, not if they share the same mother. So your uncle, who happens to have only a mother in common with your father, you will not be forbidden to marry his wife. So therefore, let's compare aunt to aunt, right? Do we look at an aunt as a sister of your father and therefore like your sister, and then includes both? Or aunt is like your aunt, and the other aunt is clear it's only, and we're going to have to see in a minute how we know it's clear it's only from the father. So now they're going to ask that right now. Okay, so Danim Isura Ba'a, oh no, they're not going to say it just yet. So so since your aunt is only there, okay, Nir Ela Midome. So now they said, let's see to which it's more similar. Danim Isura Ba'me Elav, Isura Ba'me Elav. Let's, when you're born into, from when you're born into, your sister and your father's sister were ones you were born into. But your aunt through marriage is through marriage. Oh, your aunt, either aunt is related to you through your father. So let's learn things that are relatives through your father, from relatives through your father, and then it'll only be from the father's side, right? From your father's side. So now they say Talmud Lama. That's what we need the pasuk to teach you. Remember, we started with already saying it's both sides. So the pasuk teaches you this, and this is going to teach us why this pasuk was a pasuk that we darshaned. Okay, and that was why we were getting here. Because remember, we said once you darshan it, well, then you can also learn from here to a totally different topic, even though one is kared and one is chayav mitzvah beit. Ervat achot avicha lo tigale bein mina'av bein mina'em. Okay, it says the erva of your father's sister, lo tigale, that's bein mina'av bein mina'em. Ervat achot imcha lo tigale bein mina'av bein mina'em. This pasuk that talks about the aunt, right, your father and your mother's sister, says really what Rashi says here is the pasuk is not necessary. This, by the way, is a pasuk in Parsha Kedoshim, which in Israel we're reading today and right this Shabbat, and in Chutz La'aretz we're reading next week. So the pasuk should have said, according to Rashi, I'm looking in the Rashi, Dibor Matchil Al Tochiach Miishto, Al Tochiach Achoto. It says further on there that it should have just said simply that it's true they repeat, okay? It repeats the exact same thing that was in chapter 18, in chapter 20, but they repeat it for the purposes of punishment. So it shouldn't have said, like it says there, Ervat Achot Imcha Va'achot Avicha Lo Tegale. It shouldn't say, don't reveal the erva. That was all said in chapter 18. It should have just said, if you do, right? Ishki kach, I'm reading from Rashi, what he says they should have said, Ishki kach achot aviva achot imo avadam yisau. If you do that, you get punished. Instead of saying, don't do it, and if you do, you'll get punished. It seems repetitive. So the fact that it repeats it comes to teach you bein mina'av, bein mina'em, both sides. And then both for your father's siblings and for your mother's, right? Both for your father's sister and for your mother's sister. Both of them are going to be, as long as they share one parent, it's enough to make you liable. So now they say, why do we have to say this both by the mother and both by the father, right? The father's sister and the mother's sister are from both sides. Why do we have to say father's side and the mother's side? So they say, Ervat Sorry. Lama li lemichtav ba'achot av and lama li lemichtav ba'achot em. Why do we need to say this drasha on both of them? I'm a Rabbi about tzriche, right? Why couldn't you have learned one from the other? Because you couldn't have. Everything, all the yichus, it always goes by your father. Okay, when we trace your lineage. Avalachot em alo, but you might have thought maybe not your sister through your mother, because you're not going to be connected to her in lineage form, lineage things, because the lineage always goes by the father. Because if we had it just by your mother's sister, you might say, well, that's more clear that she's your mother. No one ever really knows who your father is. Maybe not, because it's not clear. Therefore, it's shriach. Now they say, let's go back. I kind of mentioned this, and I said we get to this. It's clear that it's only through the father, not through the mother. Minali, where do we get this from? Amarava, Ervat dodo gila. Okay, and that's the erva. How do we know now? That means your uncle's wife. Uktiv hatam o dodo ben dodo yigalen. In a totally different context, it talks about your uncle and your cousin. If they get taken to be a slave for a Jew, Nevid Ivri, you should try to redeem them, right? If they don't have the money, you should try to help pay them out. There, when it says dodo ben dodo, it's only on the father's side. Also here, the mitzvah to redeem them is only on your father's side. How do we know that? Well, hataminalam, right? Once we know that, then we can learn to our case. But where do we know that from? Amar krami mishpachto yigalen, because it says from your family. Okay, only the side from your mother's side. Your father's side is considered family. Family is not considered from your mother's side, because again, all the tribes and all the nachala, the land, all used to go by the father. Now they're going to raise a question. We're not going to see how this is a question yet, but we're going to at least understand the case today, and we'll get to the question in next class. So now it says in the Mishnah. Okay, now we get to a bit of a complicated case here. Amru lo meta ishtecha. Okay, so the case is, before we even get to the case, we have a bunch of marriages here. Yaakov married Leah, and then they got divorced. But before they got divorced, they had a daughter, Dinah. Okay, every relationship here is going to have one daughter. Okay, they might have other kids too, but we're focusing on these daughters. Then Leah gets remarried to Chetzron. I'm using strange names because they're the names that Rashi used. Okay, so we go by Rashi's names. Leah married Chetzron, and they have a daughter, Yocheved. So Leah has two daughters who are related through the mom only. Then Chetzron also had a wife, Keturah, and they had a daughter, Sarah. So Sarah is a half-sister of Yocheved through the father. Then Chetzron gets divorced from Keturah, and Keturah marries Betuel. Betuel and Keturah have a daughter, Rivka, and that daughter, again, is sisters through the mother with the previous daughter, Sarah. Then Betuel and Chana have a daughter, Malka, and she's basically... she's sisters with Rivka through the father. Okay, so we basically have all these relationships that they are all have a sister through either the mother or the father. Now, if somebody married, Reuven came along and married Malka, and then Amru lo meta ishtecha. They said your wife died. So once his wife died, he was pretty sad, but he moves on and he marries her sister, Nasat Achotah. Now that's permitted as long as she's dead. So Reuven hears that Malka dies. Okay, you'll notice the X is different because this X on her head isn't she's really dead. It's just that he hears she's dead. And he thinks based on that, and he goes and marries Rivka. You can already see maybe where the story's going. So now he hears that Rivka dies, right? So Meta, he hears that she died, right? Meaning he was abroad. And then he hears, oh, someone said, your wife died. So Nasa Chotami Ima. So now he marries her sister through the mother, which is basically Sarah, right? The wife, the sister through her mother, her half-sister, Sarah. Then Meta. So after he marries Sarah, he finds out that she dies. But again, very unrealistic case, but we're just getting to these cases to get to ideas. Meta v'nasa chotami ima. Now, Reuven marries her mother through her sister. Meta v'nasa chotami aviha. Okay, again, she shares a sister through her father, Chetzron's daughter Yocheved with Leah. Then Meta v'nasa chotami ima. Okay, so he basically, it sounds a little complicated, but basically what he does is he marries each one of these women thinking that his wife was dead until he's finally married to this last one and he thinks, okay, this is my wife, all was good so far. What happens? He finds out that none of them are in fact dead. Okay, now he's a little messed up because he married these women and then married their sisters and then married their sisters' sisters and then married, right? So kept going on. So the question is, what's the halacha? So the halacha is that the first one was permitted to him because that was his first wife, Malka. But then Rivka becomes prohibited to him. Okay, this is what it says. Mutar barishona ubashlishit ubachamishit. He can marry 1, 3, and 5, and not only can he is married right now because he married them all, thinking they were dead though. But in the end, he has all these marriages with all these women. So basically, he's married to Malka because that's permitted. But then he's forbidden to her sister Rivka. Right? They share the same father. He couldn't have married her. Then Sarah, who's related to Rivka, but it doesn't matter because he wasn't married to Rivka. So he's allowed to be married to Sarah. That was a marriage that was valid. Remember, in Kiddushin Tofsim, marriage is invalid if it never took place at all. So now if it was forbidden, then it never took place. So now he's married to Sarah, but he's not married to Yocheved because then once he marries Sarah, he couldn't have married Yocheved, but he can't marry Dinah because again, she's the sister of this, right, of her other half sister, but it doesn't matter because Dinah has no relationship to Sarah. They don't share any parents. So if you look in this picture, this shows what exactly happened here. So number one, he's married to her. He's married to 3. He's married to 5, but his marriage to Rivka and Yocheved never took place at all. So that means he's permitted, meaning he's married to them actually right now without having done anything because those marriages were never undone. And in other words, that means if he dies and his brother Shimon does Yibum with Malka, then Sarah and Dinah are, they were all his real wives, and now they can go marry anybody they want. But Asur Bashniyahu B'Revi'it, he can't marry Rivka or Yocheved, so his marriage to them was invalid. Shimon, after Reuven dies without children, and Shimon tries to do Yibum with Yocheved or Rivka, since they were never married to him, that wouldn't do anything to the tzarot of, the other women. Now, the last case is in Baal Hashniya Achar Mitat Harishona. Okay, after Malka actually really died. So again, we have the same exact case. He's now married to Dinah at the end after he married all these other women. But it turns out that when he married Rivka, Malka was already dead. Okay, let's say she really died this time. So now, and then he proceeded, he didn't know. He thought she was dead and he thought all the others were dead and he ended up marrying Dinah. If that's what happens, then in the end, it switches now. At this point, mutal bashniya u'barevi'it. He's permitted to number 2 and number 4 because Malka was really dead. So he married Rivka legitimately, married Sarah not legitimately because she's Rivka's sister, married Yocheved legitimately, didn't marry Dinah legitimately. So again, he's married right now to Rivka and Yocheved and not to Sarah and Dinah. And therefore, again, if he were to die and one of them, if Shimon would do Yibum with either Yocheved or Rivka, that would exempt the other. But if he did it with Sarah or Dinah, that wouldn't do anything because he's not actually married to them. With that, we'll finish for today, and we'll have to wait till Sunday to see why this is a difficulty and why we brought this case. Have a Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.